It's a funny thing about human nature. Like every single night, right before you go to bed, you probably do the exact same routine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You walk up to your front door, um, you turn the deadbolt, you listen for that satisfying click, and, maybe you even double check it.
Right, just giving the handle a little pull to be sure.
Exactly. You make absolutely sure your physical space is secure, and
Yeah.
we do it without even really thinking about it. But how often do you check your mental locks?
Yeah, that is the real question, isn't it?
Right. Like, how often do you just willingly leave your psychological and, your spiritual windows wide open for anyone or anything really to just climb right through?
It's a pretty profound disconnect when you frame it that way. I mean,
Hmm.
we spend immense amounts of energy and, well, capital fortifying our
Oh,
houses.
yeah. Alarm systems, doorbell cameras, all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet we leave the fundamental architecture of our minds completely unguarded against any sort of intrusion.
And that concept, this idea of the unguarded mind, that is the foundation of what we are plunging into for today's deep dive. We're uh, we're exploring a truly fascinating piece of writing that was published on March 22,
Well,
2026.
and the platform called Knowledge is King.
Yeah, by Mark Wells. And it carries this really ominous title, The War Within, Recognizing the Three Entrances.
It's a great title.
It really is. And what really hooks me about this piece is that it doesn't treat inner peace as some, I don't know, some mystical abstract concept. It treats it literally like home security. It maps out exactly where the break-ins happen.
And the overarching metaphor that Wells draws from classical Islamic wisdom is just striking.
Mm-hmm.
Because the adversary, which is referred to in this tradition as shaitan, he doesn't possess some magical master key to, like, bypass your defenses.
He doesn't need to pick the lock.
Right, he doesn't need to pick the lock to your heart if you are already in the habit of leaving the windows unlatched.
Makes total sense.
So the goal of our deep dive today is to really walk through these three primary doors of vulnerability that are identified in the text. We'll analyze the mechanics of how they swing open and, explore the highly specific guards you can put in place to bolt them shut.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author starts with the most violently destructive entry point.
Yes, the loudest one.
Yeah, the first door is the door of anger, or al-Ghadab.
Mm.
And the text uses a very vivid comparison, likening anger to a fire, which, provides heat, sure, but if it gets out of the hearth, it quickly consumes absolutely everything in its path.
And that fire metaphor is deeply intentional, mostly because of how fire behaves physically. I mean, fire doesn't negotiate, right?
Right.
Once it reaches a certain temperature, it literally creates its own weather system. It becomes this self-sustaining reaction that just feeds on its own heat.
Wow, yeah, that's a terrifying way to think about it.
It is. And the text highlights that the primary trap of anger is the total loss of perspective. Like when you lose your temper, you effectively forfeit the high ground of your own mind. You elevate impulse over intellect.
It's like a controlled burn that suddenly jumps the fire line. Once it jumps, you're just reacting, right?
Exactly. You're completely reactive.
You are no longer the one managing the flames. You were just scrambling to survive them. And, in that heat, we say things we can literally never take back.
Oh, we all have those moments.
We really do. We make rash decisions that permanently damage our relationships or our careers. And it's all based on a temporary, massive spike in emotion.
A spike that eventually fades, leaving just the ash.
Right. But here's my issue. When I'm in that state of towering rage, somebody telling me to, just calm down usually has the exact opposite effect. So does classical wisdom offer anything more practical than just, taking a deep breath?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the classical advice bypasses the psychological entirely.
Yeah.
It goes straight for a somatic intervention.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, the text prescribes a practice called the pause, and the instruction is literal and entirely physical. If you are standing when anger strikes, sit down. If you are sitting, lie down.
Wait, seriously, just change positions.
Yes, change positions, and above all, remain completely silent.
Wait, walk me through that. Why does changing my physical posture do anything to stop a mental rage state? Like, how does that work?
Because anger is not just a mental state. It is a massive physiological cascade. When anger spikes, your sympathetic nervous system completely hijacks your body.
Oh, like the fight or flight response.
Exactly. Your heart rate accelerates, cortisol and adrenaline flood your bloodstream, and your body is literally preparing for a physical altercation. You are trapped in a state of forward momentum.
Right, you're geared up to attack.
So by forcing a physical shift moving from standing to sitting, or sitting to lying down, You are consciously interrupting that neurological momentum.
You're hitting the manual override switch on your own biology.
You really are. Lowering your physical posture demands an immediate shift in blood pressure, for one. But psychologically, it is also a forced grounding.
I see that.
The physical act of lowering yourself deflates the ego's posture of aggression. I mean, it is incredibly difficult for the brain to maintain an explosive, towering rage when the body is like lying flat on its back on the living room floor.
That's a funny image, but it makes total sense. And what about the silence part?
The silence acts as a containment protocol. If the fire needs oxygen to spread, your words are the oxygen.
Ah, wow.
So silence starves the fire until your intellect can reboot and reclaim control from your impulses.
You literally starve the fire by removing the fuel. That is brilliantly practical. But, okay, if the door of anger forces its way in through violence and heat, the second door the author describes operates on a completely different frequency,
Oh,
Russ.
completely different. If anger is a home invasion, the second door is the con artist you willingly invite inside.
The welcomed intruder.
Exactly. This is the door of desire, or ashawa. While anger forces its way in, desire is an entrance we often gladly unlock ourselves. Because, well, in the short term, it feels incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, the text makes a really great point that this door isn't necessarily about massive, scandalous temptations. It's not always about doing something terrible.
No, not at all.
It's about the mundane, constant, everyday pull of instant gratification. It is the pursuit of more at the direct expense of better.
And the trap of ashawa is insidious. It slowly convinces you that your intrinsic worth is inextricably tied to what you consume or what you possess or, the physical comforts you can secure.
It's exhausting, honestly.
It traps you on a hedonic treadmill, a never-ending cycle of discontent where reaching your goal only moves the finish line further away. Enough is never actually enough.
But consider this for a second, because I want to push back a little. Isn't comfort the ultimate goal for most people? I mean, we work 40-plus hours a week specifically so we can afford convenience.
That's the narrative, yes.
Right. We buy the things we want so we can relax. And if we look at another article Mark Wells wrote on this same platform, he titled a piece, "The Gilded Cage: Why We Trade Freedom for Comfort." So is our modern obsession with convenience actually a vulnerability? Because I think most people would argue that a comfortable life is the very definition of a successful life.
That's a very fair point.
Mm.
But the framework of the text argues that comfort, in and of itself, isn't the enemy here.
Okay, so what is?
The vulnerability arises when comfort ceases to be a byproduct of your life and becomes the absolute master of it. The gilded cage metaphor illustrates this perfectly.
Because you're still trapped.
Exactly. A cage is still a cage, even if the bars are made of solid gold and the floor is lined with silk. If your desire for comfort dictates your actions, compromises your deeper values, and keeps you constantly hungering for the next dopamine hit, well, you haven't achieved freedom.
You've traded your psychological agency for a very comfortable prison.
You are serving your impulses rather than governing them.
So how do we break out of that cage? The guard the author suggests for this door is discipline, which honestly sounds like the exact opposite of comfort.
It definitely is.
He mentions practices like fasting, strict budgeting, or engaging in a digital detox. But I really want to understand the mechanics here. How does putting my phone in a drawer for a weekend actually protect my mind?
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at how our brains process reward. A digital detox, or a fast, is essentially an artificial deprivation.
Like intentionally making things harder.
Right. We live in an environment of hyperabundance, where our dopamine receptors are constantly bombarded by instant gratification. Endless scrolling, instant food delivery, one-click shopping.
Yeah, you can get anything in 5 minutes.
And over time, your baseline for satisfaction gets completely skewed. So discipline acts as a hard reset for that dopamine baseline.
So it isn't just about punishing yourself for wanting nice things.
Not at all. It is an exercise in proving agency. When you fast, for example, you are telling your most primal, screaming biological drive hunger, I am in charge here and you will wait. Wow, that's powerful. When you lock your phone away, you are breaking the physical neural pathway of reaching for a screen every time you feel a micro moment of boredom.
You're reclaiming your agency from the cycle of endless consumption.
You break the cycle of discontent by proving to your own brain that you are entirely whole and complete without the constant influx of more.
That reframes discipline entirely for me. It is really about proving who is driving the car.
Precisely.
All right, so we have anger, the fire that consumes perspective. We have desire, the gilded cage of endless consumption. But the third door, this one felt different to me.
The third door is deceptive.
Very. If anger is a fire and desire is a trap, the third door is a slow, silent leak. And the author argues it is the quietest and therefore the most dangerous door of all.
Yes, the door of negligence, or algafla.
The text describes this state beautifully but terrifyingly. It calls it being asleep while awake.
A perfect description.
It's that state where you forget your purpose, you lose touch with your core values, and you just completely lose track of the passage of time. And the trap always starts with the exact same four words: I'll do it later.
I'll do it later. That is the ultimate mantra of the negligent mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text says this ends in a life lived entirely on autopilot. You get so distracted by the trivial that the essential is completely ignored.
And we see this everywhere today.
Think about the modern experience. It is the exact sensation of endlessly doom scrolling, looking at absolutely nothing of substance, and suddenly blinking and realizing 3 hours have just vanished from your life.
That is algafla in action right there.
But how does this personal autopilot make us vulnerable on a larger scale?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the broader themes across this knowledge is king platform. Wells wrote another piece titled The Shawshank Allegory, decoding the architecture of mental indoctrination.
Oh, I read that one.
The connection between the two is vital because personal negligence, that state of being asleep while awake, is the fundamental prerequisite for societal indoctrination.
Because you can't indoctrinate someone who is actively paying attention to the details.
Indoctrination simply doesn't work on the vigilant. It relies entirely on a populace that is distracted by the trivial, living their daily lives on autopilot and deferring their critical thinking to a Leidarwolf that never arrives.
That makes total sense. So to guard against this, the text introduces the concept of remembrance, or decur.
Yes, remembrance.
And what does remembrance actually look like in practice? Because it sounds a bit abstract.
It is the deliberate practice of staying conscious. The text advises starting your day with clear stated intention and ending it with rigorous reflection.
Like bookmarking the day.
Exactly. Awareness acts as a light that burns away the shadows of negligence. It is constantly asking yourself, why am I doing what I am doing right now?
Starting with intention and ending with reflection. I mean, it sounds incredibly simple, but when you are fighting the heavy gravity of autopilot, that is a massive daily battle.
It is the ultimate battle. Because if you forfeit your awareness, you forfeit your reality to whoever is willing to script it for you.
Wow. Okay, so what does this all mean when we zoom out? And it's worth noting for you listening right now that Wells doesn't just keep this in the realm of personal spirituality.
No, he goes much further.
Right. He applies this framework aggressively to modern, highly charged politics. And I want to be super clear here. Whether you agree with his political conclusions or not, and we're not endorsing a specific side here, the architecture of his argument is just fascinating to break down. He argues that these three doors, anger, desire, and negligence, are the exact same mechanisms that corrupt institutions and entire empires.
The scale-up is seamless. The inner war doesn't stay inside. It projects outward and literally builds the societies we live in. Because an institution is, after all, just a collection of individuals.
Let's look at a concrete example he brings up to illustrate this. There is a piece titled The 357-65 Shield, When Secrecy Becomes the Congressional Standard.
Right, covering a real event.
Yeah, this refers to a real congressional vote where lawmakers moved to block the release of sexual misconduct reports. And Wells views this entire political event through the lens of those three doors.
He frames this as a glaring macro example of the door of desire and the door of negligence operating at the institutional level. The institution's desire is the preservation of its own power, status, and comfort at the expense of transparency.
They want the comfort of the gilded cage without the consequence of accountability.
Exactly. And crucially, the institution relies on the public's door of negligence to actually get away with it. They are banking on the citizenry being asleep while awake, too distracted by trivial entertainment or partisan outrage to hold their leaders accountable for a 357-65 vote to hide misconduct.
If the public is practicing algafla, just living on autopilot, the institution has total freedom to operate in the shadows.
Completely. Furthermore, Wells points to history to show how this collective negligence actually erases truth over time.
Oh, like in his piece, The Hidden History Above Our Heads.
Yes, where he takes the reader to the main reading room of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
The massive dome. Millions of people visit it, but he points out there is a hidden Islamic history embedded right there in the architecture of the American capital.
Inside the collar of that dome, there are historical figures painted to represent the evolution of human understanding. And among them is a representation of Islamic science and philosophy, acknowledging the massive contribution of the Islamic Golden Age to Western civilization.
Which is a huge part of history.
Yet tour guides rarely mention it, and visitors walk under it every single day without ever looking up or understanding what they're seeing.
It just blends in with the background noise.
And his deeper point is that history gets forgotten. It becomes functionally invisible when a culture goes on autopilot. When we stop practicing remembrance, when we stop reflecting on our roots, we lose the thread of who we really are.
He connects this to some massive geopolitical concepts as well, like in his essay, The Ghost of Terra Nullius, From Colonial to Globalism.
This raises a really important question about how negligence justifies atrocity. Terra nullius is a Latin term meaning nobody's land.
Right.
It was a legal doctrine used by colonial powers to claim sovereignty over territories that were already inhabited by indigenous peoples.
By legally declaring the land empty, they could just take it.
But to sustain that legal fiction, you need a society steeped in algaflaw. You need a populace willing to look at a vibrant, populated culture and completely ignore its existence. The negligence has to be systemic.
That's haunting.
So whether he is discussing the doctrine of terra nullius used to justify historical erasure or ancient rituals echoing into modern political halls, the underlying premise is identical. A society cannot be truly free, just, or awake if the individuals within it cannot govern their own anger, their own desires, and their own negligence.
The macro is just a reflection of the micro.
Exactly.
If the citizens leave their inner windows open, the adversary simply moves in and sets up the government. That is heavy. But at the same time, the takeaway from the core text, The War Within, is surprisingly grounding.
It gives you the tools back.
It really does. It says, flat out, you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be vigilant. Watch your doors. If you practice bolting them shut, the whispers outside will eventually start to fade.
And that is the practical application I hope you listening right now can take away. Look at your own life this week. Are you reacting to stress with explosive impulse, letting the fire of anger make your decisions?
Or are you consuming blind?
Right, seeking comfort in the gilded cage of desire? Or are you just sleepwalking, telling yourself, I'll do it later, while your days slip away into negligence? The incredible thing is, the power to turn the deadbolt is entirely in your hands.
You can pause.
You can practice discipline to reclaim your dopamine. You can live with intention.
You ultimately control the locks. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on, something to, mull over as you go about your day.
Yeah.
We've established this classical wisdom that anger, desire, and negligence are the three ancient entry points for the adversary to infiltrate our minds.
The three doors.
But what happens when we look at the modern world we live in right now? We live in an attention economy, an entirely digital landscape that is algorithmically designed, down to the very code, to intentionally trigger our anger so we engage more.
To endlessly feed our desires so we buy more.
And to keep us perfectly distracted in a state of constant scrolling negligence. If the ancient adversary looked for the open windows, haven't we built a machine that literally shatters the glass?
That's the real question.
Are we fighting a spiritual war or a technological one? And if it's both, well, did you remember to lock your doors today?